Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Campbell, and welcome to another Search Engine Journal webinar. It's a nice day here in West Virginia, and we're really excited to have you all here with us. Today, we are joined by Dan Taylor of Salt Agency and an SEJ contributing writer. So what he'll be talking and sharing some technical ways to scale and grow your enterprise SEO strategy. Before we get started today, a little bit different, we want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Rock Content. Without them, today's webinar would not have been possible. Rock Content, if you're not familiar with them, offers services, software, and content to help brands plan and execute marketing strategy. For today's webinar, Dan is going to talk to us about content. We're going to touch on Edge SEO, how you can leverage entities for scalability, and how to get SEO ready for the holidays. Dan, I can't even believe that we're talking about the holidays. This year has gone so quickly, but thanks for being here with us. Can you tell us a little bit about you and Salt before we get into some webinar housekeeping?
Yeah, no, 100%. So thank you for having me. And yeah, I can't believe it's almost the holidays as well, and soon this time will come around again next year. So I'm Dan Taylor. I'm head of research and development at Salt Agency. We're a UK-based technical SEO and demand generation house. We work primarily with SaaS and large e-com clients, and especially in the startup market. And as Heather said today, I'm going to talk about some of the enterprise tactics we can use and take away and use practically.
Awesome. So just quick housekeeping tips, and then we're going to let Dan fill us on all the knowledge that he's going to drop today. So if during this training presentation you have any questions or comments, put them in the questions box at the bottom of your screen. And as you're learning and taking in this information, ask for further clarification. You know, there's a really good chance that you're not the only one thinking about that question. So we're also going to be throwing in a couple poll questions throughout just to keep you guys engaged and get your thoughts. Your participation helps us with our engagement score, and it also lets our speaker gauge your knowledge and speak to that. So we always have a goal of 70 to hit for our engagement score, and our last webinar was around 65. So we're really trying to beat it, you know, that competitive space. Let's win with the next one. So make sure that you guys are engaged and click in those buttons for us. We're also going to do our best to link to any resources in the questions box or in the chat, but if we miss one, please ask. And after the webinar, we're going to ask that you stick around for a short survey. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes, and this information really helps us gauge what works for you and how we can make SEJ webinars more useful. So lastly, you're going to receive the full recording of this training later today. Included will be a handout from our sponsor, so keep your eyes on that inbox. We're going to take questions during the webinar instead of holding them all for the end. So if you have any questions that are relevant to the content that we're at now, you know, put those in there. That way we can speak to that and keep moving along. So that's all from me. I know that we're going to start off with a quick poll. So Dan, I'm going to go ahead and launch that. Is that, oh, hold on. Sorry guys, technical difficulties. All right, when creating a lead gen content, how frequently do you get feedback from your SDRs? And what makes an MQL convert to that SQL? So I know as marketers, these are always the questions that we're after, right? So from your perspective, you all out there as the viewers, you know, when you're creating content, how are you, you know, how often are you getting that feedback from your sales team? We'll give you guys another couple of seconds to get those answers in. So far, Dan, we're leading the charge with what's an SQL and an MQL. So
I mean, I can speak to what those are if that helps. I might help inform some of the poll answers.
Yeah, let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. We got about 50%. There we go. We got 51% voted. All right, so we'll go ahead and close this and sharing those results. So yeah, we ended up with 54% saying they weren't even really sure what an MQL or SQL was. 29% says sometimes they are getting that feedback. 17% said they don't get that feedback ever, and 0% said they always get that feedback. And as a marketer working with sales teams, I will buy that number all day long.
So yeah, so essentially in kind of the SaaS and startup world, a lot of metrics very early on, especially when companies are receiving funding, the MQL and SQL metric is something that is quite heavily focused on, and the conversion from one to another is oftentimes seen as a good barometer of the hunger that a marketplace has for a product or new service, especially if it is disruptive to that market. So in simple terms, an MQL is a marketing qualified lead. So generally speaking, we classify these as a user has engaged with a piece of marketing content from either the SEO channel, paid, a webinar such as this. They've come through some sort of funnel and they've then converted from the messaging to basically submit a form or an inquiry. Then the SDR, so your sales development representative, your sales team, whatever terminology you want to use for them, they then pick up that lead and will initially do a vet and qualify it as either a sales qualified lead or oftentimes junk. So that conversion from a marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead helps, especially with a feedback loop. And when the sales representative speaks to that lead and conversion to better understand the pain points, they can actually then feed back to us as marketers, and especially with SEO, to say like, hey, we're getting these leads through and they're converting on this page, but the messaging might be ranking for these queries, but the user experience that we're saying this product will give is actually mismatching to what their needs are. So we're sinking time into trying to qualify this. Whereas when we take that feedback, we better understand what is qualifying from an MQL to an SQL around specific products and topics, and then change the messaging on the website itself or through the actual marketing. So sometimes it can reduce the number of leads, but ultimately it improves the quality of the leads coming through, saves the SDR team time, and it helps conversion rate and just growing a more satisfied user base for monthly recurring revenue and annually recurring revenue as well.
Great, that was a great explanation. So with that, Dan, I'm going to get out of here so you can get into your presentation. And all right, it's all yours.
Awesome, thank you, Heather. So we've covered a couple of the poll things today anyway. So what I want to go over is what I'm basically going to cover today, and that's really in kind of three sections. So firstly, how we can utilize the concept of Edge SEO, which is using the CDNs or other middleware platforms to improve processes, improve user experiences, technical band-aids, a few things around that. Then secondly, how we can use entities and leverage them at scale, not just to tick boxes or go with Google Knowledge Graph, but to create better content and create better content clusters, topic clusters, which can then be used to use top of funnel, bottom of funnel, but ultimately connect dots, which Google's connecting itself within its knowledge graph to make you appear more authoritative, more relevant, and essentially be more of an algorithmic, almost box tick, but providing user value at the same time. And then thirdly, I'm going to horrifically talk about the holidays in September, which as a Brit and a British thing, that's a really big faux pas. But I'm going to talk about some e-commerce holiday readiness strategies, kind of incorporating both edge techniques, entities, and other things which can just help the user experience and ultimately maximize the revenue opportunity at this time and during these peak periods. So I'm going to skip along a couple of slides because you don't need to know any more about myself. We've gone through the poll question. So I want to talk about some Edge SEO process automation. And firstly, actually go into what Edge SEO is. So the long and short of it, essentially, it's using CDNs or middleware or other parts of the infrastructure to execute what we want on the live website, bypassing heavy dev backlogs, platform restrictions, and sometimes doing things in a much quicker, efficient manner or even doing things in ways we weren't able to before. This kind of gives us the opportunity to implement not only technical band-aids whilst the actual fixes are going through development queues, stop hemorrhaging revenue through loss of technical fixes. It's basically kind of it can either be a Hail Mary solution or a really good tool in the toolkit to actually leverage more opportunity. One thing I will say on this and keep reiterating is that whilst you can do this through your CDN, through your middleware, you might have access to your company's Akamai, your Cloudflare, your Fastly instance without actually having to get any approval from the developers or sysadmins. From experience, it is vital that you do include development in these conversations. It isn't a method of bypassing this, because ultimately the development teams will still be pushing tickets to the live site, they'll be testing them on staging, but then when we push them to live, because you've configured something in the CDN to do something on the live site, it can introduce bugs, it can introduce downtime, and if the developers don't know what you're doing, then they're going to be trying to fix a bug which they don't know how it's being generated, and it can just cause a plethora of more issues. So kind of a demonstration of how this works and this concept works. So you have the user or user agent on the left, and they request a URL. The URL typically will then go through to the middleware, or which is usually a cloud CDN, and the cloud CDN will have cache versions of the actual website from your origin server or your hosting. So what we then do through the CDN is we see that request coming through URL, and then we can use a combination of what are called filter chains. So these can be the request, the response, and the body. And at different stages, we can implement different things. For example, if we need to redirect the URL, but we can't implement the redirect because of a platform redirect limit or some other issues, we can actually do this through Cloudflare, through Akamai, through Fastly, and redirect to another URL. If we want to be able to collect the responses and other areas, we can actually do a form of pseudo log file collection in the response phase and store them in Google Cloud Functions and make it easier that way. Or in the body section, we can actually modify and inject content on that URL dynamically based on the criteria. So I'll go on to some uses of this, but essentially it's a modification in that middle phase. They all then combine into a final response, and the final response is pushed to the actual user or user agent. Some of these things can be discriminatory against either Googlebot or users, and just basically make life easier, reduce cost in areas, and get things done quicker, which might be in heavy dev backlogs. So some of the potential applications around this, and I'll cover a few of these today, both in this edge section and in the holiday readiness section, is essentially the limit to what you want to be able to do with this kind of technology is very much limited to what you're able to actually code. For example, in Cloudflare, the original worker code was written in JavaScript. Now they support pretty much all programming languages. You can just go through your deployment process and developers can do this. So the suitability really of this is defined by business need, by what is capable and what is suitable. And as I've said a number of times, these can also help circumvent platform restrictions, hard code issues, or just simply if a development queue's massively backlogged and you need something quick because there's a really good traffic opportunity or opportunity cost, which will be missed otherwise. So without going through all the bullet points individually, here's a stock list of some of the applications which we've used this for, ranging from redirects through to dynamic JavaScript rendering, all the way through to waiting room tokens for high peak traffic in e-commerce, and even overwriting product page body copies depending on stock availability. Again, we'll go on to this in the third section. So one of the main examples of this, especially in price-driven markets or availability-driven markets, is the ability to produce dynamic title tags. And I'm even with Google rewriting title tags now on the fly using page content, knowledge graph elements, and which way the wind's blowing in some sectors at the moment. We can actually use a script through this to inject onto the page. For example, if you're selling sneakers of a certain brand, and it's a price competitive SERP and it's a price competitive query, you can preload the page to automatically pull through the lowest price you're displaying on that and inject it into the title. So when Google reads the page, each time it keeps coming back, it reads the declared title tag in your code as the cheapest option on that page. So again, that'll impact click-through rates if Google doesn't rewrite the title tag, so that users constantly looking will see, you've got this at X price, competitors aren't showing this, you can get the click, and then it's the opportunity to either convert, or if you're doing other forms of marketing, get them into display campaigns, email campaigns, and get that retention there. The second main use I want to cover over is that around JavaScript, and especially during high traffic periods when there might be high frequency page changes, there might be a lot of other things going on, and ultimately you might be pushing new pages live and wanting them indexed, rendered, everything else quickly within Google. And depending on stacks and depending on how things are implemented, JavaScript can be quite tricky, even with dynamic. So the workflow on the right kind of explains roughly how this works for the Cloudflare worker. And essentially the format is you produce a XML sitemap of the pages that you want to be dynamically rendered. They go into effectively a Google Cloud function that gets pushed through to Cloudflare via an edge worker. It will store a cached version of those pages, and that can be updated daily, weekly, monthly, whatever change frequency you need. So then when Google comes to the actual site, Googlebot's user agent is detected by Cloudflare. So the Cloudflare worker then will give them the cached version of a pre-rendered complete page. Again, meaning that you're not rendering every single request, you're rendering single instances and then providing the single instances back to Cloudflare. If you need to make sure that's updated and Google gets that, you can purge the cache, do a secondary pull, and then request indexing through Search Console, and then the lead time for Google then seeing a freshly changed pre-rendered page also decreases. And there is an element of being in the lap of Google gods there, but it can, especially in high peak seasonal and holiday traffic periods when you're wanting to promote certain deals and different things, getting that information processed through Google quickly when it's time sensitive can be vital. So some of the takeaways I want you to take away from this section initially are that Edge SEO can be worth exploring as an option, especially with any kind of technical issues that you may have or opportunity costs which platforms are being prohibitive of. They can help you improve the technical performance, and as I've said, can provide either a short-term fix for a technical issue, whilst the actual long-term fix is 6 to 7 months down a dev queue, but having it now could improve performance. You can also use it to improve user experience through things like even the dynamic title tags. We'll look at that from a top level and say, yes, we can probably influence click-through rates, but also by the same token, by accurately being able to feed that price onto the title tag, if a user does go, oh yes, those sneakers are $50, and then clicks through to it and actually sees on the page, this wasn't a misleading price, they actually are there for that money. It's a positive user experience, it's a positive brand experience, and that can go a long way, not only for that initial conversion, but also retention and other good actual benefits of just actually providing good customer service and a good product service. And we can also use this, as I said, as a technique to improve data collection and help users using the site for things like A/B testing, injection of ITM links on internal links, and also better understand the crawlability visibility through the form of pseudo log file analysis. So also importantly, again, I want to reiterate the fact that I've put together a flowchart to determine whether or not you should include developers and stakeholders in anything you're doing with Edge SEO, and it's a relatively simple flowchart to follow. All developers and your deployments will have a predefined process. Even though you might be wanting to use this to circumvent the developers, it's important that you use their deployment processes and they're aware of what's going on. Otherwise, you can introduce untold number of bugs and bugs of certain severities, which will just cause more issues and more opportunity cost down the line. So the second section I wanted to kind of cover over around is that of leveraging entities. And when we talk about entities, there's multiple things that are covered. There's lots of areas, but I'm talking about the core elements of using things like Google's Knowledge Graph API, using Google's image category tags, and kind of using how Google itself is presenting data to us, and also using what Google itself has patented in terms of actual technology and how it goes around things. So I know for a lot of people, it is a case of entities again, it's the flavour of a month that comes around every few months, but especially with how Google is now rewriting title tags, we're seeing in specific sectors as well, especially where it's an e-com site and it's selling the brands of other manufacturers. Using sneakers again, it's selling Nike, Adidas, Puma, Reebok, where previously we would have Adidas shoes for sale online. We're seeing Google recognizing Adidas as the entity even more and moving the consumer, actual the client brand name to the front of the title tag to say client name, Adidas shoes online. So it's almost trying to create a disambiguation between this isn't actually Adidas shoes online, this is this company selling Adidas shoes online. So understanding how Google's now at that point making those connections, it's more important, but we also then start looking at what we can to see how, well, if Google's making this connection between this and this, maybe we should also start making that connection within our content as well, because Google's seen a valuable link. Obviously, there's a lot of common sense that needs to go into this, and with anything in SEO, there's no one size fits all, and it shouldn't be a rabbit hole followed blindly, but with common sense applied, we can potentially find some good niches and a lot of, try to use the phrase, long tail elements as well, which can help bring benefit. The other reason why we're talking around this as well is because ultimately we want to improve quality. So we know from recent tweets and recent coverage that Google has that quality threshold, and it's normal for percentage of sites not to be indexed. The no indexed element, we've known for some time. The quality threshold, we've probably known for some time as well, but it's nice to actually have it in print and that it can be pointed at. So with this, we want to use entities to create a better, not better content, but a better user value proposition. And with a better user value proposition, we can go above a certain quality threshold because we've not got a duplicate proposition across the site, and we can then start to modify our value proposition from our content and our products and our service offering and differentiate it from all competition online, all competing for the same marquee keywords and other elements around that. So a short sort of like brief bus stop history of how entities came about. So with Hummingbird, we know that it took phrases such as Whitby Town, who are a soccer club in the UK, and moved it from being a text string to a thing, and it got an MRAID, a machine readable entity ID. So Whitby Town became M/09C9_K. Then we know with RankBrain, Google was able to take the things, which it converted from strings, and connect the things together. So again, using the British terminology of football, Google was able to understand that Whitby Town play football. So it was able to recognise within that string and within that sentence, there's an entity, there's another entity or topic, here's some IDs, and then you can map around it. Understanding this and how these topics can be related together ultimately gives us an understanding into how potentially Google sees the internet and how it sees the connection between brand and generic queries. And then this lends itself to other elements of Google as well, things like EAT and your expertise, authority, trust, and how Google is able to perceive that based on your coverage and breadth and depth of value proposition around specific topics. But ultimately as well, we know that Google has been learning about the internet for years through various classification systems. But if it's been learning about it for years, with anything, there has to be a quantitative scoring metric against this. And Google has revealed in patents, it has 4 metrics of which it scores entities against. These are the relatedness, So this is a determination based on co-occurrence. So basically how frequently these elements or these topics are found together. There is a notability formula that Google have to basically identify how notable the entity is. It breaks it down by value, so this will take things like links, mentions, reviews, relevance, if it's being used in conjunction with non-branded queries, if it's a heavy search volume brand. It tries to judge like Gravitas, Better Business Bureau, Wikipedia, every signal you can imagine to try and actually judge how valuable this brand is and how valuable this is to this topic, and potentially whether or not, if someone's searching for I don't know, soda pop online, will people expect to see Pepsi? Will people expect to see Coke? And it then goes into whether or not Google can produce a SERP which meets users' needs. And meeting users' needs is also about meeting user expectations, because it's like Googling any kind of topic area and not seeing brands you'd expect to be there. It has to understand this to provide a trustworthy and logical SERP. This in the past has been described as big brand bias, but it's also, you expect it to be there as a user, and Google's just kind of using the signals it has to almost put those pieces together. The other two metrics that go around this, essentially contribution. So Google's measure of an entity's contribution to a specific topic. So we always, the example of this is a restaurant food critic is going to have more weight and more expertise in a specific area around restaurants and food than my potential Google My Business review. And then finally, the prize metric, which it basically looks at how celebrated the entity is. And this could be industry awards, peer awards. I think the patent itself mentions things like Nobel Prizes. It's just how it works. But also with that is applying another entity prize to another entity. So winning a small local business award, yes, is an award, versus a national award, but Google will recognize the weighting difference between them. And again, it helps if the prize you're getting yourself is a prized entity. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling cycle at one point with that metric. The other important thing is, like I've said, Google's been taking data from the internet for a large, well, basically for years and a long, long time. And as SEOs in the early days, we focused heavily on text, we focused on links, we focused on creating content, we did it in various ways. There's one thing that not all mainstream focused on, which has been around on the internet since the dawn of time, and is something that Google took note of in 2012 and actually started to use better for classification systems, and that is images. So in 2012, they released a post talking about how it was going to use better image classification systems to identify the contents of objects and things within images themselves to primarily improve image search. But through images, which we've probably uploaded to websites just thinking they look nice, they're relevant, Google's then been able to look into them, and actually then when it started to identify entities through images and then make the connections, actually started to go and actually create an almost pure data set that wasn't being impacted by SEOs and marketers, but just being impacted by images and the lack of modification and manipulation there. So it does this by creating node and edge graphs. So like you saw in the pictures previously, bears is the example in one of the patents. So we know that the node, grizzly bear, has a relationship with fish. We know that the relationship with fish is that it eats fish, and we know that fish live in water. So it's already starting to then map that. Now you have enough images of bears hunting fish on the internet around water, and you've got a high level of co-occurrence. Then we'll write content about it and safety around water, especially around rivers, bear hunting, etc. And then we've created this little matrix Google's confident in, where it can actually then say bears eat fish that live in water, so therefore grizzly bears hunt near water. So even though they're not amphibious, they don't live there, it's made that connection to a third topic through a direct connection. So understanding this is how we can then try to better understand how Google thinks. If we try to map this ourselves on a very top level, we can actually then say, well, bear is a species, and the species of a bear is a panda, and then very quickly we've gone to a Google update. We can then link from a Google update to penguins. We can then link to a polar environment, back to polar bear, back to bear. So creating these maps and these intrinsic maps, we can actually see this. Now, it's all well and good looking at very linear examples like this, but what happens when you actually apply this to not so factual elements? So I'm not talking about things where we know if a bear is hunting fish in their water, that's a fact. How about fictional things and stories and almost the products and things we invent, the non-tangibles? Well, we can actually do this, and the example I'm using here is Cinderella, which has obviously been made famous by Disney. But looking into what Google actually knows about Cinderella and looking at the knowledge graph, we might know as a trivia fact that, oh, it's a derivative of Aschenputtel by the Brothers Grimm. Well, actually, Google knows from the internet and other signals that actually it goes back even further, and Cinderella was originally a derivative of Rhodopsis by Strabo, in which there was no glass slipper, there was a sandal. There's then been other iterations of this through the years, which Google's aware of and can tie back to it, where it wasn't a glass slipper, it was a dove transformation, it was a brocade, which I believe is a shawl, and even a light gold shoe. It's only in the Cendrillon by Perron version where we got what we got today. But because Google has the information and can make the connections, it understands this network. Similarly, if we start then looking at things like film, movie, software, companies, everything like that, it can then actually start to really put connections between stuff. So another example in Patience is Planet of the Apes. It can derive from a film, age ratings, release dates, what actors are in it, and then it can make connections between actors and other elements. So you'll see this in search results, how it creates carousels, how Google starts to populate other areas of pages, even how it starts to do with people also shared for elements. And doing this and understanding that, we can actually then start to map topics. So when we apply this to our own content and our own value propositions, we want to understand how Google will actually treat and reward it. Well, this is something we actually started doing way back when, where we created essentially a learning center framework for a CDN, in which we took the entity research, keyword research, mapped it all together, and just put it together in a simple 18 URL. Here's a comprehensive thing, making sure we ticked all the connective boxes. And that can cause actual, well, as you can see from the third-party graph, it actually can drive traffic, it can drive topical relevancy, and it can improve rankings for commercial phrases as well, because you're further contributing to the topic, from you're further improving traffic, you're further improving your notability, and you kind of then start self-fulfilling your own entity prize, for want of a better word. So how we can actually get this data at scale, there's, for me, 4 really good ways of doing this at the moment, and these are through image category tags, which I'll show on the next slide. There's the knowledge graph API, which you can pull through directly. There's the entity search engine, which was made by an SEO called Carl Hendy, and there's also entityexplorer.com, which is a visual kind of click-through map, which there's an image of on the right. Image category tags, for me, are one of the more pure forms of this, because Google's been learning about images for years, and I'm curious to actually know how many SEOs going to be watching have consciously wanted to put images on a certain website because they contain certain elements which aren't just related because they're relevant, but related because exactly what is in the image and other elements co-occur and actually become part of that topical structure. So with this, we see this on image search. Google pulls these through. You do a search, you go to it, and then it pulls through some filters. So for a category tag filter, and we can see these change over time, and these are especially interesting to watch in emerging topics, and especially when other entities within this start to get more notoriety and more notability. So these can be pulled and scraped through things like Python, through data extraction. They're quite easy to do, they're quite easy to look at, and they're available for all search queries. So this is a really scalable way of just looking at what Google's associating with it, and then use common sense, drill down, and make some progress with it. So some takeaways I hope that you're taking away from this essentially is that images, because of how pure and untouched they've been, they can provide a great insight into other topics and aspects of what is wanting to associate with our original topic. That there's some really great tools built by some even greater people to leverage this knowledge, and that you can now actually take this away and start to apply this alongside your keyword research and your topical plans to create even better user value propositions. So the final section I wanted to cover over is the concept of e-com holiday readiness, and this is making sure that the site, both from a topical perspective and a technical perspective, is ready, and there's no opportunity costs which you'll be left kicking yourselves after the peak traffic periods. So at this point, Heather, I have another poll question. I don't know if you want to come in and set that up.
Yep, I'm going to launch that right now.
Yeah.
And so with this one, what we're wanting to know is, when do you start planning your content strategy around Black Friday and Cyber Week? Yeah, it used to just be Cyber Monday, right? Now it's like Cyber Week. Before you know it, it'll be Cyber Month.
Yeah, I think if Amazon get their way, it'll be Cyber Month very soon.
Right, right. So far, leading the charge is 43% are saying they start in August. So maybe our webinar is just 1 month too late. Maybe we need to look at doing this, a little earlier next year.
Yeah, from experience, August and September are typically the months when this starts to happen, but it's sector dependent, especially when suppliers are involved and you don't know what kind of deals you're going to be putting together.
Exactly. So we got about 44% have voted. Let's see if we can get it to 50. We'll give you guys another couple seconds to get in there. And we'll go ahead and close that. And then, so what we have here, Dan, is 38% said August, 35% said September, so spot on there. 19% said October, and 8% said November. So little stragglers in there.
I can imagine those in November potentially will be down to things like supplier issues, because I know in some sectors I work in, they leave it and the suppliers leave it until 4 or 3 weeks beforehand, and then you've got to go through making sure the stock to do it, actually put the deal packages together, and it's a quite a rigmarole to do last minute, but you still have to do it because of high traffic periods.
Yeah.
But no, thank you for everyone answering that. I'd be curious to know if you have any questions in the chat as well. What kind of, like in August, what are your initial kind of things that you start planning initially? Do you start off with deals? Do you start with content? Do you already going into it know what kind of areas you want to focus on, or do you kind of go in with a technical and have that robustness in place? That'd be awesome to know as well, which I'm sure Heather can feedback to me. So when we talk about holiday readiness, we obviously know, and everyone in this webinar clearly knows from the poll answers, but all industries have a seasonality, but the majority of them do come later in the year. Interestingly, the Black Friday Cyber Week towards the end of last year, according to Google Trends, was lower than it has been in most other years, which, given how last year wasn't like most other years, the data probably can't be questioned in that sense. However, this year potentially could go back to normal based on just slightly more normality. So it's a good opportunity cost. Well, not opportunity cost, it's a good opportunity to avoid an opportunity cost even in this way. So having a comprehensive holiday readiness strategy for me goes beyond the user acquisition, but we also need to look at retention of existing users and providing, I'm going to say again, the positive user value proposition, and ultimately a user experience that is positive to lay a foundation to actually have them want to come back. Because whilst it's good, we're going to get that quick revenue, having someone come, have that positive experience, feel like they've been catered for, having them come back, reducing their actual initial CPA, their cost per acquisition, increasing their LTV, their lifetime value, is just fantastic for a business, and that can help grow to new echelons with new coverage. So this also means having clear messaging, realistic and positive user experience forecasts. So by user experience forecast, I mean things like, if I order on this date, will I get it for the weekend? If I'm looking at this product now, yeah, the price is really cheap, but am I going to get to the final stage of checkout and get stung with a shipping charge? Even though we might have reasons for not doing some of them elements up front, giving people that value, or sorry, that user experience forecast, accurately forecast their experience of shopping with you and what they'll get from the product and after service, could really help both with just website general feedback, reviews, and that retention and returning customer. So the main things I want to look around this are essentially how we can maintain that user experience during the peak traffic and customer experience times, because at this moment in time, as well as having more people looking, more people wanting to spend, expectations also increase at that point as well. And because there's so many other vendors in the market trying to sell the same products as you, trying to offer the same services, all making equal, less, more amounts of noise, if you don't provide that seamless purchase transition, there's plenty of other places that will try and buy for that dollar. So this is why we look at things like waiting room tokens, which, yeah, they're probably not going to improve rankings. They're not going to improve our overall SEO performance. What they'll improve is potentially users coming from organic, having their expectations managed, their forecast accurately set. So then when they convert through organic, there's actually higher conversions, not higher drop-offs. And it can actually just it'll make the channel look better, and it'll make the channel actually reflect the value it's bringing to the website itself. So one of the main ones I want to touch on a bit is that around content modification before I actually go into the waiting room token workflow. And this essentially is the notion that when a user comes to a web page, or even if they come to your home page, navigating to a product page or searching on a site takes an element of user effort. During a sale period or high traffic period, that user effort is usually reduced because they just want it quicker and faster. So if they eventually navigate to a product and it's out of stock, the user experience is negative, and that cannot impact just that session. But then if they go somewhere else and that caters for them, not only with that product in stock, but even just a more positive experience, that might leave them from leaving shopping with you and a new loyalty elsewhere. So it's not just that single revenue and single session impact, it's the lifetime value of that customer that's been dropped. So the two key areas this can be done, especially through Edge, is to create a dynamic content interstitial based on things like availability and also time of day factors. So if you have a product which, say it's Wednesday now, say it can be delivered by the weekend, or if I order in the next hour, I can even have it tomorrow. Use time-based factors and have this appear as a non-intrusive, non-ridiculous little overlay in the corner, little hand wave emoji. Literally just say, hi, if you actually order this before 3 p.m, you can actually have this tomorrow. If you order it before 5 p.m. on Thursday, you can actually get guaranteed Saturday delivery or checkout. So even though they're looking at this, you might have free delivery messaging elsewhere. It's kind of like a little reaffirmation. It's non-intrusive, and it's almost a, yep, hey, we can do this in this way. And some platforms might not have this functionality built in. So again, or if they can, it needs to be developed. But through this, you can create something visually nice. You can use reactive measures. You can use time-based measures, and just implement it seamlessly through a CDN and help maintain and set that user expectation and set that fulfillment element. The second one I wanted to cover off is that around out of stock products. Now, with out of stock products, they can pose problems. We know sometimes with Google that having a PDP page with out of stock messaging, unavailable, any kind of messaging like that could trigger a soft 404, meaning obviously it's dropped from ranking for specific queries. However, having it still ranking for those queries and having all that effort you've put into actually making it appear on page one in a traffic driver position, you want to keep it there. You don't want to have it just completely go down the pan and be lost. So what we do in this situation is, rather than having the big obtrusive out of stock banner, manage it through different content and use, again, another interstitial to come up and have logic rules built into it. So in this example, that red sneaker is no longer in stock. However, apologies, this one isn't. You can either sign up here for a waiting list, you can get notified when it is back in stock. Alternatively, people who bought this also looked at this, so this could be an alternative, and you can control that based on what field you want. So if you know you've got a new product launching, or you know that during the Black Friday Cyber Week there's going to be some products which typically will sell out faster than others, and you know there's going to be high fervor and high demand for that, rather than just have people come, oh, that's not in stock, be disappointed, leave, you can then try and funnel them to different areas, or at least funnel them into different channels. Final one I wanted to cover was that of waiting room tokens. And during extreme high traffic periods, having a good, robust waiting room token system, yes, it can be frustrating to be a part of it. However, it can be great for managing user expectations, especially if you give it the dynamicism. If you know that someone's coming onto your site specifically to purchase product X, and you've got stock control built onto the site, you've got that visually there, and it auto updates, you can actually then feed back into our waiting room where the user sat there going, yep, I want to buy product X, we've sat here for 45 minutes, they get through to the site, out of stock. So that's 45 minutes, and that's a customer burned. So what, instead on that waiting room, you can use that functionality and build that workflow where it's telling them in stock, low stock, then start asking for email, because you don't want to say out of stock email, because you'll just probably annoyed on that point, but say out of stock, we're getting some more in on this date, put your email address in here for notifications, etc. So even at the low stock period, you're starting to let the user know that they're potentially going to be out of stock by the time they get there, but you want to try and smooth that. You want to deliver the bad news in a, sorry, there's no cake today, but you can have it tomorrow. Instead, you start saying, even if the cake's run out today, we've got some more coming tomorrow, and we're out. Here's your email, thank you, I'll let you know when we're in tomorrow. And it's a much smoother transition. So from this section, what I'm hoping you're taking away from this is that they can be great short-term little tricks through Edge to improve kind of reducing opportunity costs around the Black Friday Cyber Week periods or other peak traffic periods in general. And with using overlays in this way, you can configure your own logic trees, because you control the whole process of cross-sell, upsell, and even just pushing people to other channels. So at this moment, I'd like to say thank you, and I will pass back to Heather.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So that was a lot of really good stuff. And we didn't have as many questions during the webinar. You know, we talked about taking them during. So one of them I did miss that came in like right at that first section. So let's go over this and then we'll dive into some of the other ones we have. So Dan is wondering, perfect, there you go, Dan Taylor. Now we have a question from Dan, and I'm going to say, is it Oilet, perhaps is the last name? And what he's wondering is, in JavaScript rendering, can this be a solution for Angular, for example, Angular University or Scully?
So the short answer is yes. However, you just need to configure the worker for that. So we've used it for Angular for a classifieds website in the Middle East, and using the same methodology, you're simply taking the sitemap of the pages and you're pre-rendering it in essentially a bucket. It can be an AWS, can be in Google Cloud, can be anywhere you want in a repo, and you're updating that as and when you need to. You can do different sitemaps based on different page frequencies. So you're basically storing a pre-rendered cached version of that single document, so that when Googlebot comes, Bingbot, whatever bot you want to actually detect it for comes to the site, you recognize the user agent and you just give it the cached version. It can work for Angular quite well. My brain has now just completely forgotten all other forms of JavaScript. Other forms of JavaScript are available, of course, and we've not seen any implementations across any of them. Depending on how your stack populates, especially if it's Jamstack or anything like that, you might need to do a few little tweaks just in the worker bundle code. But again, you're not restricting yourself to anything like pre-render.io or Rendertron or any pre-built frameworks. You're kind of building that framework and using something like pre-render.io or Rendertron just to render single instance versions. as opposed to the whole site all the time on request.
Perfect. So Dan also commented, great webinar, very helpful. So thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
So we have a question from Aries asking, do you have an example of a waiting room token situation? Why would someone be waiting 45 minutes on my site to see a product in the first place? Perhaps I'm missing something.
So I will take judgment for this example because it's an example I did about 2 months ago. And there was a store in the UK which every now and again online sells something really cool. And 2.5 months ago, they were selling kimono ceramic egg barbecues, and they really high quality slow cooked barbecues, quite cheap. And for the price of those, they were selling them relatively cheap. They send an email out 48 hours before saying, hi, Sunday morning 8 a.m. these will be live on the site. So because of how their payment systems will have worked, they couldn't have thousands of people go to that site to try and purchase limited stock, because then you'll end up having issues with processing. So what instead they do is they use a waiting room system, knowing that most people are probably coming to purchase that single item. So it takes the load off the site. Some ticketing websites as well implement waiting room token systems. I think in the past week, ABBA are doing that virtual hologram thing again. And I know in the UK, one of the main ticketing websites went down because essentially that many users trying to do that many requests, not all servers are built robust, not all have failover stacks, so the ticketing website went down. So it's it's almost like a pseudo form of DDoS, distributed denial service. It's just user DOS instead. So in high periods like that, that can be useful, but again, you might not need to use waiting room tokens if your traffic levels and you are able to be coped by your stack. It's just some events, especially around certain things, require that little bit extra for the customer experience, and that typically happens around high deals, high release events, and sometimes, especially if you've got a really high demand product and you're selling it really cheap during the Cyber Week or Black Friday.
Great, thanks for that explanation. And Arya said, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. So we have a question from Akash. If product A is unavailable on the e-com site, where would we need to be redirected to that product, or where would we need to redirect that product? On the main category or similar product or same brand?
So in terms of redirects, I necessarily wouldn't just redirect a product page if a product's out of stock. If a product's out of stock and it's never going to come back into stock, or it's a version 1 of a television set and version 2's come out and you've got a new page back, you go version 1 to version 2. If it's just temporarily out of stock, you'd maintain the product page up, but instead you'd use an interstitial or some sort of cross-sell or upsell tactic to say, hi, sorry, yeah, we know this product's out of stock, however, this one's really similar, or this one's really similar. And some website CMSs will do this automatically. For example, Einstein on Salesforce can be configured to do this automatically. I'm pretty sure some WooCommerce and WordPress can do this automatically as well. This is kind of if you want easy edge to do it, if you want the next level up, or you want to have custom configurations, which can be a bit finicky in certain CMSs. So generally speaking, you wouldn't want to redirect it unless it's never coming back in stock. And if it's never coming back in stock, then I've pretty much gone 15 minutes without saying this, but it depends. And it will depend on what kind of product it is. If redirecting it to the category would be relevant, could it be redirected to another similar brand model? If not, and it's just something which has got no backlinks to it, and unfortunately it's a product that's gone, are you going to write a blog post talking about how great it was and then link to similar ones, redirect it there? If not, there's oftentimes no issues in letting the URL just 404 if it's been removed, because if you blanket redirect it to something inappropriate anyway, Google will probably see it as a soft 404 and you just put a redirect in place for no reason. Sometimes there's no problem in 404ing something.
Perfect. I think that was a great explanation. So we've got about 5 minutes left. If there are any last minute questions, we are happy to have them. We do have Dan for these last few minutes. In the meantime, while we're waiting, Dan, anything else that you want to let people know about, or any information, based on the slides that we talked through? Excuse me.
I'd probably say that, especially with things like Edge, and when you're looking to use new techniques like this, that by no stretch of imagination are these new things. We've been able to code like on servers in this kind of way for quite a number of years. This is just more of an accessibility development in terms of non-technical people can access this vulnerability. You don't need to be a full-fledged developer. And a lot of CMSs, a lot of platforms will have support, will have plugins, Magento will have modules, you'll have different cartridges for Salesforce, you'll have a lot of this will be supported. This is more a alternative solution rather than a let's all rush to this and let's just make sure we and well, basically it's not, rather than treating it like a flavor for doing something, it can be used as another tool in the arsenal to mitigate risks, reduce opportunity costs, maximize potentials in certain areas, and even in some cases we've seen it actually alleviate strain of devs. Because I know as an SEO, you pick up a new client, you start working with someone, and you'll want to hammer the developers with a load of tickets. You'll probably use a weighting scale, story points, value points, prioritize them. But ultimately, there'll be some things which will be costing revenue, some things which aren't, and you will not get to everything fast enough. So this can be a short stop solution for some of that whilst it's being developed, or even in some cases just become a long-term solution, like a lot in cases where I've seen this used for log file collection and JavaScript rendering. Some websites are just using this permanently now, as opposed to the more traditional methods that we know.
Perfect. So I think we've got maybe time for one more question. Let's see. All right, we'll take this one because I think that this one should be somewhat short. So Akash is asking how to target an e-com site from multiple countries in terms of technical SEO. Should I use a lang tag?
Yeah, so with that, I would kind of take the e-commerce element out of it, and I would use basically the hreflang framework for this. So with this, you'd have your alternate URLs based on this URL is targeting, say, the US, this URL Canada, this URL Mexico, and then you would implement hreflang, which is either a page level meta tag, or it could be done via the XML or through HTTP headers as a way of signaling to Google. So users coming from this country with this language or locale setting, this is the appropriate alternate version of a route page for them. It is worth noting with this, however, that just because you might have alternate versions of the site for different areas, there are instances where if a value proposition doesn't change between it, so very good examples of this is, say, if you have a US website and they also want to sell in Canada, just changing the price and not changing anything else to accommodate the difference between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar might result in the US potential with more dominant version even ranking in different countries. And you'll go into Search Console and you'll see that Google is picking a different canonical to the user declared, and they'll be picking a different version. So you want to also make sure that when you alternate from a technical perspective, you also, through your content, change the value proposition. So when Google comes to it, goes, oh yes, this has a value proposition for the US, this has a value proposition for Canada, they're correct alternate versions, because Google is a business at the end of the day. Storing all that data costs money, and it's not going to store X number of versions of one website when they all say the same thing, just with the currency difference.
Great. So a couple other questions, but we're at the end of our time, so we'll get those over to you, Dan. Maybe we'll answer those in the recap post. So, with that, Dan, I do want to give you a big thank you for being here with us today. And this was a very technical webinar, and I think it was great for our viewers. So I really appreciate that. One more time, we want to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Rock Content. It was a great conversation. Like I said, there were a couple other questions that we couldn't get to, so we'll send those over your way, Dan. But real quick, before we let you go, tell the folks where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. It's at TaylorDanRW. You can also find me at dantaylor.online, Solder Agency, or just feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and just look for the Dan Taylor with a beard and strange hair.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you very much. For all of our viewers out there, know that you'll get this recording here in a couple of hours, so watch your inbox for that. And with that, we hope you have a great day. Thank you all. Bye, Dan.
Thank you. Bye.